Hey everyone, it's Lena, and I am re-recording the Facebook Live for the editing process because I got all finished and was waiting for it to upload and realized it somehow never recorded. So technology, it's wonderful. Anyways, today was all about sharing my editing process and then talking about why editing is so incredibly important. So anyone that reads my blogs, I posted, I know in this group before too, that editing has not only been the bane of my existence and is absolutely the most frustrating aspect of being a self-publisher, but it's something you absolutely cannot skimp on. Editing is hard. As I know one of our group members found out when she recently published her book, she had it edited, tons of people read it, tons of people looked for errors, and yet there were still some issues. And that just goes to kind of prove my point on how important the editing process is. So first I want to talk about what I do and then give you some tips that I think are absolutely crucial. I personally have my work edited 3, sometimes 4 times for a couple different reasons. I finish my draft, I get it as clean as I can get it, as perfect as I can get it, and then what I do is make sure to send it to a content editor, and she takes a fresh set of eyes and looks through to make sure that there's continuity with all the chapters, there's continuity with the characters, and there's continuity with the plot. Now you might be thinking, well, I'm the one that wrote it, why can't I just do that for myself? When you're too close to it, you sometimes don't notice. I mean, let's face it, it is easier to point out someone else's errors and someone else's mistakes than it is to point out ours. And when you've been immersed in your work in progress for weeks, months, years, it can be kind of hard, even if you set it down, walk away, and then come back, which I also highly recommend, to then pick all those little errors out. So I sent it to a content editor. This person will also read through your story and offer ideas, to make things tighter or more compelling, looking at scene structure. Again, things that you might not notice because you're too in the thick of it. Then I get it back. I make all of the necessary changes, and no matter how great I think my book is, there are always necessary changes. And then I send it to a copy editor, and they're looking for the down and dirty grammatical issues, spelling issues, tense issues, that kind of stuff. I get it back from that editor, make all the changes, and then I send it to another copy editor / proofreader, depending on the amount of corrections I think the book needs. And the third person goes through making sure that, again, everything is grammatically correct, the tenses are all matching, all that kind of stuff. Now you might be thinking, that's overkill, or why don't you just send it back to the first person that copy edited? Well, the thing is, we all have strengths and we all have faults. And editing is a hard gig. If I send it to the same editor, if by chance he or she missed an error the first time around, they're going to miss it the second time around because maybe it's just not something that resonates, something that grabs them. We all kind of have what's important to us and what's not important to us. By sending it to 2 different copy editors, I can make sure to the best of my ability that nothing slips through the cracks. And I will also say, regardless if I have 2 editors, 3 editors, 2,500 editors, there are still going to be an error or 2 that your reader is going to pick up. I mean, we have all read books from the big 6, or big 5 now, that have had errors because it is hard. Not to mention, there's so many different styles in the English language. Things can be missed because one editor, might be focused in Chicago style. Another editor might be focused in MLA style. Grammar in the English language has so many different styles, it can be hard to catch. Now, editing is the most expensive part of this whole process, and I get it. A lot of people don't have that kind of money to put into it. I had the same when I started as well. So you might not be able to do the 3 rounds, and with content editing, beta readers are also a great resource for that. But at the very least, have at least that final, before you hit publish, a professional editor go through it. Not your friend, not your sister, not somebody you know that teaches English at the local college. A professional editor in your genre of fiction that knows what to look for, knows what's acceptable, and knows what's not acceptable. Because that friend of yours that's really good at English might not know what is best for your particular genre, because each genre has rules, each genre has creative licenses. So even when you get a professional book editor, make sure they edit in your genre. And most editors aren't going to take on a project of something that they don't typically read, because they know that, and they don't want to put their stamp of approval on something that might have some errors based on context or based on genre. But it is really important to save your money and at least have that one final professional proofreader that can go through and catch those errors. Now, as you have readers go through it, they're probably also going to give you, hey, you use this in the wrong tense or whatever. Make those on the fly. You know what? Yes, is it kind of embarrassing when someone points out an error? Of course it is. But just say thank you, take the feedback, fix it. I mean, I had my very first book that's been out since 2009. Someone emailed me the other day, and there was a discrepancy between gone versus went. And I mean, it's been through 500 proofreaders. This particular reader didn't like the tense it was used in. So again, I just thanked her, said, you know what? I appreciate you catching that. Sometimes it's hard to catch all the mistakes. Still have a great reader. No harm, no foul. Just, take that criticism with a grain of salt. So if you're, watching your pennies and you're saving your money for that final proofreader, what are some tips that you can do in your own self-editing that is going to help you have the most error-free product to give to your proofreader? One, and I talked about this a couple days ago when we were talking about rough drafts when I was editing this weekend, print it out. I know printing out a couple hundred pages on your printer is going to waste ink and paper, but there is nothing easier than catching mistakes on a hard copy. Reading it on the screen, your eyes tend to gloss over a little bit. Reading it on paper gives you, one, a different way of looking at it, which is huge, and two, makes it easier for you to catch some of those mistakes. So print it out, read through it. Another tip, and I know it might sound crazy, but I'm sure a lot of you will agree with me, read it out loud. If you're struggling with how something sounds and you're like, does that make sense or does that not make sense? Picking it up and reading it out loud will often be able to give you the information that you need to determine whether or not you need to change it or if it's the right way. Another thing that I would do if you're trying to work on a budget is go through and make sure that you're not using crutch words. It's too many of, that's and thes and ands or dialogue tags. Clean it up. Make it as tight as possible. You don't always need to put, Lena said, Frank said, Kathy said, Karen said, unless you're changing from the two people speaking and adding a third person. You need to keep them all straight. The reader isn't dumb and they can usually follow it. So take out extraneous dialogue tags and extraneous words. Use adverbs as little as possible because that's going to weaken your writing. Stay away from slang unless it's pertinent to the dialogue, to what the person is doing. I've seen this a lot with some younger writers because texting shortcuts, all that kind of stuff, makes us butcher the English language even a little bit more. So just remember your audience, and if it's something that's totally within realm, if you're writing young adult and you need to use those abbreviations or different things that one would understand because it's a text message and maybe that's how you're writing, that's fine. But just, watch out for slang or unusual dialogue that might not be widely understood and either put some context behind it or just take it out. Also, you want to look for the crazy commas, and again, depending on your style, there are different ways to do that. So whatever style you pick, when it comes to commas, when it comes to even writing short sentences versus longer sentences or compound sentences. Make sure your writing style is consistent, because if it's consistent, the reader's not going to notice as much maybe those small errors. But if you use a different style of comma rules in the first half versus the second half, then you can have issues. And I'll say one example with commas. So if you have a list of 3 things, a lot of us in my age that grew up going to school in the 70s and 80s were taught, I went and had a red comma, blue comma, and green ball. Some people don't use the comma before the and, some people do use the comma before the and. So just stay consistent, because as long as you're consistent, no one's going to really notice. So just to recap, editing, 100% the most important thing you can do for yourself when you're publishing your book to make sure people take you seriously. And if you need help with finding good editors, and I don't want to say cheap because that's not going to happen, but ones that will fit in your budget, please don't hesitate to post in the comments. I've got the ones that I work with. I know a ton of different ones at different stages and that I've worked with in the past, and new ones that are taking on new clients. So I would love to be able to connect you with an awesome editor if that's what you need. And other than that, keep writing this week, and I will talk to you all soon.